Just a quick note. We interviewed Jeff Lane in the upcoming episode, and we interviewed Jeff on April 15th, at the very beginning of the COVID crisis, and we were unsure what was going to happen. We talked to Jeff, and we agreed to release the episode after his museum had reopened and is available for patrons. Please forgive anything that we mentioned month-wise, time-wise, as all of that may or may not have changed. Please enjoy.
Let's talk about cool cars.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start. Welcome, everybody, in this barrage of interviews that we're doing lately here on No Driving Gloves, getting a lot of people through the microphones and, I guess, headphones. You have Sean briefly this morning, and we have the privilege of having Jeff Lane, the owner and founder of the Lane Motor Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. I could give you a little spin and rundown of the Lane. It's a place I've been to many times. It's actually been a little over a year since the last time I visited. But it's has some pretty unique, I'm going to use the word eccentric, very odd cars that you're not used to seeing in the U.S. I'm going to pass it off to Jeff. Why don't you give us like a 1-minute synopsis of the museum, and then we'll get a little bit into.
So yeah, the museum is odd and unique is kind of our, I guess I would call our tagline. So we have about 450 cars in the collection. They're predominantly European, although not exclusively. And we have a significant collection of micro cars. We have propeller powered cars. We have amphibious cars. We have two-headed cars. That's kind of what we search for, is cars that people typically haven't seen anywhere else. We display about 125 cars at one time, kind of depending on how our displays are set up. We also have about 75 motorcycles, 75 bicycles, and a couple of airplanes. So that's kind of a broad brush overview.
See, I'm into the eclectic, odd car stuff, and walking into your place, I can pretty much live with this collection because you have everything from bicycles and, like you said, airplane-powered cars to the gyroscopically controlled cars to really as mundane as a Dodge Viper.
Right.
It's just a nice selection and very well presented there. The getting into we'll jump kind of into this. What created this? Did you all of a sudden walk out into your garage or barn one day and go, I got too many cars, I need to do something with this? Or did you wake up one morning and have an extra industrial building and go, I think I'm going to make a museum, and what am I going to what am I going to put in?
What kind of created it was my dad was a big MG T-Series fan growing up, and we restored MGs and went to MG meets all over the United States. So, he was kind of into classic cars, and he got me into classic cars. So I had, my first car was MGTF that I put together, restored before I was 16, and took my driver's training test in. So it kind of starts really, really early in my life. But if you fast forward to, I was probably around 40, which would be about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit earlier than that. I started racing in SCCA when I turned 20, and I did that for like 10 or 15 years. And then I kind of stopped doing that. And then I really kind of got more interested in collecting cars. And I started like with a BMW Isetta, a Dodge Power Wagon, had my MGTF, and I had a couple other MGs. Fast forward a couple of years from that, and I had about 75 cars in a matter of a couple of years. So I had them stuffed in, a couple of rental houses. Of course, you'd never rent a garage, and I had a couple of industrial buildings, and they were kind of scattered here and there. When I got, I had like an Ampha car that I drove around town and take to the lake. And of course, people always saw that. And I bought a Tatra T87, which I used to, I would drive it home sometimes and leave it in front of my house until, every time you did that, we'd be eating dinner. So we pounded on your door, what is that car? What is that car? And my wife finally said, don't bring that car home anymore, but you'd go to car shows and like there's usually a Saturday night dinner, and you'd be sitting around and people would be saying, well, how many cars do you have? And I'd be like, 75. And they'd look at you like, either you're crazy or they didn't believe you, right? Because most collectors.
Not how many cars have you owned,
right?
Like how many cars? Not how many have you owned in your entire life? How many do you have now? And you go back to 75. It's like, oh my God!
Right. So people they'd look at you weird. In fact, I used to think I could hire myself, because a lot of times the guys would say, "Look, honey, I only got 5." That's not that many, right? I thought I could hire myself out as a role model for all these guys that want to increase the size of their collection. And they were mostly weird, European different cars. And so people kind of around Nashville, some people kind of got the vibe that I had these cars. And I remember one time I had a guy that was my neighbor, and he came over and he said, "Oh, my son is a car nut, and he's turning 12 next Saturday. We know you got all these weird cars, and I was hoping for a birthday present. You could take him around and show him your cars." And I said, "Yeah, I'd be glad to do that." He said, "Oh, I'd be glad to pay." And I said, No, that's fine. I'm happy to do it." So I had, at that time, I had two 5,000 square foot industrial buildings next to each other. And then there were cars scattered like at different rental houses and stuff. And so, they came over on Saturday morning and we went over there, and it's funny, he had these two Instamatic cameras, 20 shots or something like that each, right? So we're in the first building. Maybe he didn't know there was other buildings, and he's shooting pictures like crazy. And I said, "You better slow down, because this is just one of the buildings. There's a building next door, and then there's a couple other places we could go." But anyway, he had a great time, and kind of started to think I either need to stop collecting, not increase the number, or I need to put these in one entity where they'll be all together and people can see them. And, I like to drive my car. So I actually had, when I got to about 50 cars, I hired a full-time mechanic to work on my cars so I could drive them. I'm mechanically inclined, and I worked on them some, but with that number of cars, I just didn't have the time, to keep them running and moving.
One time I had 13 cars in my collection, and that was the problem, is to keep them all running, and I couldn't afford to hire a guy, so I ended up having to pare down the collection. I can't even imagine, really 50 or
right. So anyway,
cars.
I just decided, maybe what I should do is just do a museum. I've got I had the financial wherewithal, and I said, at that point I was about 45 years old. I thought, I'm young enough, maybe I ought to go ahead and do it while I'm young, and I still got the energy and everything. And so that's why I did it. I wanted the cars to be together, and I wanted, car collectors are different. Some people are very private. You can look at my cars, but don't take pictures. I don't want the public in looking, and I understand that. But I always wanted to share my cars with people. I want to be able to see them, and we give rides in the Amphicar in the summertime to our members. That's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy doing, is having the cars move and having people being able to experience them, get rides in them occasionally and things like that. The museum was the perfect venue for that.
Well, you do display them. When I first took a job at the Barber Museum 12, 13 years ago, whatever it is now, we kind of had the same deal that you do, that you go into the museum and, there's not a lot of stanchions. There's a lot of interaction with the exhibits, and one of the nightmares of having a museum is touchy-feely people that want to climb on stuff and look at stuff. And my Facebook memories today is somebody put a sticker on one of the Lotus at an event, and I think 8-9 years ago. Why do people do that? And ironically, I was watching the old TV show How I Met Your Mother last night. It was an episode they were at a museum, and the two of the characters are having this contest on who can touch the most and whatever, and they end up dressed up in the museum garb and clothing. And sometimes the general public can be horrible, but I kind of, your museum, it kind of invites that, but it also, everything seems to be obtainable. You have that, at least when I was there last, which, like I said, was a little over a year ago. You had that Citron that you immediately invite people to sit in and touch, and, they can spend as much time with that. And I think that helps detract. And then you have a wonderful little kids interaction area that kids can go play in case, they get bored. And, I kind of have a familiarity with how 7 and 8 year olds get. And I think some of the stuff you've done is designed really well to keep that open environment and openly share things, because, people don't want the stanchions, and the general public doesn't understand why stanchions are there. But there's, you've managed to, in my opinion, somewhat control it. I'm sure as the, managing director, you still have some headaches and some issues, but it's just
and for us, we drive all our cars, so it's, we don't have $10 million perfect whatever, Alpha or whatever you want to type cars, and we don't want people to walk by with their belt buckle and scratch them and stuff like that, So, we try to monitor it, and with the public, right, 95% of the people are really nice. and really care. And then there's always that 5% that you have to kind of treat them like children and say, I had one guy who was out there on the floor one day, and we have a sign that says, "You please look, take pictures, but don't touch, except for the car. You can sit in the picture car." But he was sitting in the cars, and I went over to him and said, he's opened the door, getting in the car. I said, "You're not supposed to touch the cars." And he said, "But it doesn't say you can't sit in them." And, you got to explain to him, well, you can't get in a car without touching the door. Even if you climb over, right? You're still touching the car. Yeah, yeah. So there's always, those people, it's like, where did you get your common sense? So, but, overall, we haven't had any major issues.
I'm glad you haven't. It goes back to, I used to do a lot of product expert work for a bunch of brands, and it got to a point back, I think it was back in the 90s, where we literally started having to remove shift knobs and remove radio buttons and knobs and anything that could be taken off the car. We literally, on a car show floor, we either had to make sure that it was glued down or remove it, or it was going to walk away. And the fact that your collection is as open as it is, I think speaks volumes to the people that are coming through your door and how you have fostered that relationship with your guests. I mean, it's really cool to see that the cars, even though obviously you don't want people to touch them, they still feel accessible.
Right.
It's been a long time since I've been in there, but it's not a stuffy museum environment that you've created. It's literally walk up and take a look, and that's cool. That's really cool to see.
Yeah, and with that too, people say they can see inside. A lot of cars, if they're roped off, you can't see the dash, you can't see the interior too well. And a lot of times you can, some museums you can't really walk around the car. So if you want to view it from the side or the back or something, you don't have that opportunity.
You started this collection, you hired the mechanics so that you could drive them, and you still drive just about everything in the museum. You lend things out. And it's one thing that I wanted to touch on, and I wanted to touch on it while Sean was still with us. You do an event every year, and I think I learned about it. Sean and I were discussing, and I think I learned about it 10 or maybe 11 years ago when you first did it,
right.
The Rally for the Lane, which I don't know if any other museum does. Now, unfortunately, it's become so popular, I think it sells out within minutes of your announcement. First couple of years, you had a week or two to take advantage of this, and that's where you provide a list of a lot of dream cars, odd cars, unobtainable cars in this country, and for just a couple $100, maybe $1,000, you go on a rally and you let your museum's patrons, your members, drive and operate your cars, which is I have a large museum background, museum conservation background, and I've heard a lot of museums, the Barber Museum even says everything in there is drivable, and there's always exceptions to that rule, and even the stuff that's drivable has little quirks. But I think opening your museum the way you do, and the cars, you're putting cars out there and letting people drive them, and you have to have confidence they work and they're reliable, and it really speaks volumes to what you have in your collection and how it's managed. And I mean, I look at the list every year, and anymore I'm too late. And, unfortunately, I know you'll be mad at me. I'm not a member or anything, so it doesn't help. And I'm not a previous participant in the rally. I never can get an opportunity to jump in anymore. But I mean, some of the stuff on this list is, things if I get a chance, I'm gonna buy a place and drive one.
And part of what we believe is, it's about education and experience, right? And what better way to experience a car than be able to drive it, right? I mean, it's great to look at it and read about it and learn about it, but the ultimate, to me, the ultimate education is the opportunity to drive the car. And great event, and we love doing it. And I know that it's, people have said, why don't we do 2 weekends? Why don't you do 3 or 4? But it's, it's a lot of work. We just decided that 2 is really about all we can handle logistically. So.
I mean, you're doing 2 weekends, and what are you running? 20, 25
right,
cars?
We do.
I didn't count the list.
We usually do 25.
And I'm sure you spend weeks and weeks prior to that having the mechanics go through them and make sure they're workable. And then after it, you spend weeks repairing anything that might have happened, a leak that developed, or, ignition problem, or any of the little stuff that may occur on a rally, and utilizing 40, 50, 60-year-old cars or one-offs or two-offs. It's just, the fact that and Sean and I both jumped and kind of said, this might be one of the top cars. But you have two Renault R5 turbos. And I think that's a dream car for a lot of people. Sean and I are both late 40s. It's kind of a dream car for our generation, and it's fun. And I know the first year you did it, you only had the black one, and this year I noticed you had two added to the list, a white and a black one. So obviously that must appear to be a very popular car.
Yeah,
somebody donated, or a white one came along.
It is a popular car, and we've always had two. The white one, the engine blew up like 15 years ago, and we never repaired it. And we finally, the rally, we always talk to people, what cars do you want? And everybody's always saying, I've been trying to get the R5 Turbo for like 5 years. So we finally put the effort into rebuilding the engine and getting that car back on the road. So we now have two, and hopefully most people will get a chance at it. But I've got a funny R5 Turbo story for you. I took the black one to a rally in Texas, I think about 3 years ago. And it was down near the Mexican border, West Texas. And when you come back, I never experienced this before, but going down is no problem. But when you're coming back, even though you're in the U.S., I think if you're less than 50 miles from the border, they have like different checkpoints. And they stop you and they ask you what you're doing and everything. And so I pull up with R5 Turbo. And, it's like a tent in the middle of nowhere, right? And there's like a dog, and there's like 3 agents out there. And so this young guy comes over and he says, what are you doing? Well, I'm on this rally, and well, where do you live? And, I said, well, I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And then apparently the supervisor, I think with the dog, he sees the car and he comes running over there. And he goes, oh, you know what this is? And I said, yeah, it's R5 Turbo. He goes, oh, this was my favorite car when I was growing up. I've never seen one in my whole life. He's going crazy. And that was the end of the questioning. I talked to him for 5 minutes, and he's like, you're out of here. So
good to go.
So what border crossing was that? So that when I want to bring my R5 in from Mexico.
It isn't actually a border crossing. It's when you're within 50 miles of the border and you're coming north. They have different days. They do different roads. So you're not really going from Mexico to Texas. You're in Texas, but it's like a spot check thing, I guess. But yeah, R5 Turbo, great car.
I'm looking at the list that you've got, the current list for the rally that's on the website, and we'll share that list on No Driving Gloves. Just, I would have a very hard time deciding. Like, the R5 is definitely on the top of the list, but I used to have a 73 Bavaria, so you have my attention there. I'm looking at the Alfa Romeo Sport Zagato. Oh, it's so pretty. The AutoZam is amazing. I just don't think that my big self, in my current peak of human fitness, would fit in an AutoZam.
It's a tiny car.
It's an amazing just collection of cool. It's like, how do you pick the cars that you're going to take out on the rally, and are they in a rotation kind of thing, or is it kind of the same cars for most of them, or what's the process there? The process
is, so we kind of, we got some criteria. One is we do 150 miles a day, so 75 in the morning, 75 in the afternoon. So it's got to be able to do that kind of distance, right? It's got to be reasonably reliable. We don't want stuff that breaks down like crazy, because then we have to replace cars. It has to be, safe's a relative word, right? Because we do 2 CVs. But, we've had some people that wanted old Fiat 500s, which are an absolutely tiny car. So we've kind of said, no, we're that's kind of a below our line. And it has to be able to go 55 miles an hour. We've had people that wanted to do some slower, like micro cars, like a BMW Isetta, which realistically will go 45, and then you hit any kind of hill, you're down to 30. So that's kind of the criteria. That's kind of the criteria we use. And, people can make suggestions. And we also don't do like the Dodge Viper. We don't do really high performance, super fast cars. Not that we have very many of those, but we have a few. So we're kind of avoiding that, because we're always, concerned about somebody getting in over their head.
That's easy to do in a Viper, but high performance, super fast, and well, you do have an Evora, you do have the R5. You do have some stuff that's definitely fun and can get out of its own way. We'll say. So
and I have to go ahead and throw this out there. Add the '98 Multipla, and John and I will split it and come up and cover the rally for No Driving Cars. What in the world? Like this, I look through your collection, and it's quite possibly the only museum collection that I've ever seen that speaks to me, like truly speaks to me.
You're a weirdo then.
I'm totally a weirdo when it comes to, I call myself fat guy in a little car. I like tiny, nimble cars. All of your Fiats and your Citroens and all that stuff, and the Renault R5, and you've got the Renault Spider. And then I look through the collection, and there's a Fiat Multipla and a Fiat Panda. Mm-hmm. Which I find amazingly cool just because we can't get them in this country. But what in the world possessed you to put a Fiat Multipla, which is quite honestly considered by most of the planet Earth is maybe the ugliest car ever built? But I find it cool.
Yeah.
How's that end up in a museum? It's so cool to see stuff like that.
Well, part of it is, we have an old Multipla from the 60s, when Fiat initially did the Multipla. Which is a fantastic.
Which actually is a really good-looking car.
Yeah, and it's a fantastically engineered, designed, executed type of car. And so, they stopped making the Multipla for a period of time, and so we said, to kind of tell the story, we want the newer Multipla to show how they went from the older one to the newer one, and I know the styling on that car. I mean, I like the styling. I think it's neat. But I understand people can look at it and say that's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. I mean, I see that. I wouldn't say that, but I can see how you could say that.
I just think it's cool from an engineering standpoint. You just and it fascinates me to stand there and look at that car and then try to imagine the engineers that were designing that. Mm-hmm. And what their thought process was. That's what gets me going. It's like, how in the world, why would you do that? And then you just stand there and look at it for a while and you're like, okay, that makes sense. And it's crazy. It's totally crazy.
Yeah. It's a great car, but it's it's the continuation of the story, which melds in with the exhibit that we have now that actually is going to stop here pretty soon. But it was called Then and Now. So it's like the old Mini and the new Mini, the old Multipla, the new Multipla, the old Fiat 500, the new Fiat 500, which was kind of a, people think of a Mini. And I mean, I've had people say, I had some friends that said, I'm thinking about buying an old Mini, and they were a couple and they were, pretty good sized couple. And I said, you ought to come over and sit in our old Mini before you go buy one because they're pretty small. And because they're used to a new Mini. So they got in there and they're like, we're shoulder to shoulder. Against the doors and against each other. I mean, they're like, this thing is tiny. And I'm like, yeah, it's tiny. So, that kind of shows people how cars have grown.
And that was one of the exhibits I was going to mention. It goes back to, you have some great models and I love your cutaway engine displays. And you have a little inline 4-cylinder open model thing in one of your display cases, and I'm fortunate enough to have the same one. It's love it when things in my collection I see in museums. I go, well, that must be important in all my hoarding to have kept that. Yeah. But you're doing, this Then and Now, and it is an exhibit that I wanted to come visit, and here I'll do it next week, and I'll do it next weekend, and unfortunately, I think I'm going to miss it, and I'll just have to go in and put it together myself, find the Mini in one area and the Mini in the other area, and the Porsches or however you have it set up. Of course, you have the one of your highlight photos on the website is, a new 911 and an older 911, like a 70s era 911, maybe in 80s, late mid-80s.
Yep.
And I'm going, ooh, now I want Then and Now technology, because I had the fortune to, restore a Lotus Mark 10 that had a pre-selector transmission in it. And one of the things I say about the pre-selector, it's nothing less than what the Porsche PDK is, except Porsche got to cheat and use computers because the new PDK is a pre-selector transmission. And as your quote on the website from Mark Twain is, there's no such thing as a new idea. Mm-hmm. I've said that for years about cars. It was thought of in the beginning of automobiles. I mean, the electric car was. If Derek was here, he talks a lot about electric cars and the early electric cars and dual overhead cams and, strange valve trains and, like I said, the transmissions. And we're just figuring out now, and we now have the technology to be able to implement those things. And it's just, it's one of those little crazy ideas I had that, then and now is a neat idea, and especially to learn how small cars were. I mean, it's even amazing how small cars were, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, especially in the full-size truck segment.
Right, yeah.
Where the new mini Ford Ranger is as big as an F-150 was in '05. So I've looked at the events, and I know what we're going through, and we're trying not to focus a lot on, this virus thing that's going on, because we like our shows to be a little bit more evergreen. You have, a lot of exhibits and special events, and you've obviously added the vault tours, which is, I think all the museums have done now that the Peterson proved that people want to see what's behind the scenes. Right. When I visited, you had one of the side buildings open, and loved to wander through that. And then how I came to reach out to you for this interview is you guys have been posting like crazy, or what a marketing person has been posting like crazy, Instagram photos and things. And one of the Instagram photos was the basement, and I didn't even realize there was a basement to the place. And then of course you have the military vehicle hidden outside, and maybe you can or can't say, but one of the Instagram photos said you were out acquiring something a few weeks ago, and it was very secretive. And I think I threw out that you were getting one of those little UFO houses, because that would seem like a eccentric thing that you would have, and would be a neat thing to set in front or behind the museum.
If you have one of those UFO houses, the next time my wife and I come to Nashville, we will rent that instead of the hotel room.
I don't have one, actually. But
get one.
Okay.
It does fit in with the collection in a big way, man.
All right.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
The Lane bed and breakfast.
Absolutely.
There you go. Yeah.
That thing would never be vacant.
What are some of the things you have in store or right around the corner for you, or kind of are thinking through your head? Because I'm sure there's a rethinking of events, and some are planned out, and you have the cars borrowed and things like that you can't change.
Right.
But what are some of the things that are on the calendar, and when we all can get out of the house and race away? I might wait a week or two to even release this episode so that it's fresh in people's minds as, hopefully freedom occurs here in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Right,
but what's the Lane have in store that,
we do about 4 exhibits per year, and we usually kind of March, April, early May is when we do our change, although we change individual cars kind of throughout the year. But because of what's going on, our change is going to be delayed. I mean, it was supposed to kind of happen this month. Obviously, it's not. But we're doing an exhibit on women's suffrage, because this will be the 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote in Tennessee in 1920, 2020. So that's an exhibit. We have a Model T. We have a couple of small micro cars that were advertised as second cars, take your car to the grocery store when your husband's at work type thing. We're also doing an exhibit on, we have a bunch of propeller powered cars, propeller powered bicycles, propeller powered boats, propeller powered ice sleds, which we, exhibit a few here and there. And, like maybe 6 months ago, when we're starting to come up with new exhibits for this year, I was wandering around. I said, we have about 14 propeller-powered vehicles that are, some are in the basement and some are on display, right? But they're kind of scattered. So I think people don't get the not the enormous, but the totality of it. So we're going to put those all together for the first time to do a propeller-powered exhibit. That's another exhibit. And we're also doing what we call a stacking exhibit. So we're going to stack 5 vehicles on top of each other. So we have a Tatra rollback, and then on top of that will be a Citroen Tissier, which is like a flatbed car hauler. And then on that we have I think it's a 34 Goliath truck, and then a Subaru 360 van, and then one of our micro cars on top of that. So we thought that would be a crazy, type thing to do. And there's a couple more exhibits that if you look on the website, they'll be on there. The opening dates aren't going to be correct, because until we get back to work, we didn't really want to keep saying, okay, we're changing the dates. Once we get back to work, then we'll say, okay, now what are the new opening dates? That'll be updated as soon as we can.
Some of those sound interesting. When you assemble the stack display, do you like put the micro car on the Subaru 360 and then load that, or did you actually? Are you going to cheat and use a crane?
We don't have a crane, so we haven't actually. I mean, we haven't done it yet. It's got to be done in the museum because it'll be 19 feet high, and our door going into the museum, I believe, is 14. But we'll probably do it the way you do: is put the small car, put the micro car on the van. Then put the van on the Goliath, then, continue to, do it that way. But we haven't actually done it yet, but we do have a chain fall, I guess, if we need to do that to get it stacked up.
I was going to say that's something I'd love to see a video of or watch, but I also have been there when you try to assemble some of that stuff, and it takes 8 times the time you thought it would, and you say a few words that can't be said on television. So
here's how you get by that, though. You set up a time-lapse camera, and that way the audio is not really there.
Right.
You can say whatever you want to say.
We've done some projects like that. We're like a deer-type camera, right? So, as we're restoring a car, and then every time you walk by, it takes a picture, and you end up with thousands of kind of pictures, which is a nice historical thing to have. So we have done that with everything.
It's awesome.
Let's get into, or I want to touch on, now, you're Jeff Lane, and you've been on you've been on Leno and, just all these TV shows, and, you get all these questions that we've asked you for the last, half hour, 40 minutes. What's the question you wish somebody would ask you that you've never been asked? I have questions, people, when I represent Lotus and things like that. Nobody ever asks me this, but what's a question you think people should ask and you're surprised they don't ask you, either about you or the museum or your hobbies,
I don't know that there's a question that hasn't been asked. The thing I try to portray to people, because sometimes, people come to the museum and they'll look at you kind of like you're some kind of god or something, right? Oh, I saw you on TV, and I'm just a regular car nut, right? I'm probably more eccentric car nut than a lot of people, but I'm not different from most other people that, I enjoy cars. I enjoy working on them. I enjoy driving them. I enjoy learning about them. I think the majority of my life is pretty normal. When people sometimes, I think they think that, there's some kind of pedestal they should put you on, which I don't. I'm kind of uncomfortable with that.
But there's no little odd Jeff Lane little thing. You said deer camera, so you obviously hunt or something, maybe as another hobby.
Yeah. No, I'm not.
Deer cameras don't pop into my head.
What are you passionate about outside the museum? Like, it's or is the museum, or is the automotive, the vehicular, is that the all consuming for you?
Well, it's pretty consuming, but I have, I'm an avid bicyclist. I like to do triathlons. The sprint, the short triathlons. And I enjoy doing that because it's kind of the thing about running a museum is you're kind of known as the car guy, which is, that's okay. That's not bad. But, you want to not always be known as the car guy, maybe sometimes, right? So, and you do triathlons, it's kind of a pretty different group of people. So it gives you some variety in your life. So I do that, and I like to travel, which is work is mostly travel, but it's a lot of fun too. But I enjoy it. Generally, when I'm traveling, it's I'm doing car stuff or doing other business stuff, but it's still fun. And I like to read. But besides that, I don't have. A lot of people say you should learn to play golf, and I like to ride my jet ski on nice days, stuff like that. But I don't have a ton of extra time, really. I'm not retired yet, so that kind of fills me up. Yeah.
When you're out traveling, I know I do this. Whenever I'm flying into anywhere in Europe or the UK, as we're descending into whatever airport it is, the first thing I do is look out the airplane window, and I'm looking at cars either in parking lots or on the ground going, can't get that. I really wish we had that in the States. Do you find yourself doing that? Like, I'm so happy to get into another country and then just start looking around at going, I'd have that car, that car, that car, that car, that car. Is it something you do, or am I alone in my madness when it comes to that?
I do it all the time. I'm exactly like you. I'm in the airport looking around at cars driving around, and I'm like, oh, what is that? I don't know what that is. I don't know. My girlfriend, we're out driving in Europe, and she likes to drive, so she drives a bunch. And she's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking at the cars going by, So, yeah, I'm exactly like that.
Totally it.
Yep.
Yeah, I accosted a guy in the middle of London. We were in the Soho district in London, and it was my wife, my mother-in-law, and myself, and we're walking along. We're going to a show, actually, and this guy pulls up in a bright yellow with red leather interior Marcos Roadster.
Oh,
and it was epic. It was just absolutely epic. And I ran over to the car, and I'm like, do you mind? Can I take some pictures? And the guy, I know he heard the accent, and he's like, this stupid American. But I was literally like, this car doesn't exist in my regular world. It doesn't exist, and I can't believe I'm seeing it. And he was kind of nice, but at the same time, I think he thought I was going to rip him out of the car. I have more car-struck moments than I have starstruck moments. I literally will be like, this is a car that I've wanted forever, and I've been looking through the website, the Lane Museum website, as we're doing this interview, and I don't have to leave now. I got a message, and my meeting's been pushed, so you're gonna have to put up with crazy Sean for a minute. Looking through your website, your Renault collection is insane.
Yeah, I like
totally
Renault.
Insane.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the best way, it's insane. I'm looking at an Aventime and a Spass, and then you get to the Clio V6, the Williams Clio. Oh my God! And then you actually have a Megane Renault Sport F1.
Mm-hmm.
The Renault, the Megane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you ever hear the UK based commercial when the new design Big Butt Megane came out?
No.
There was a song that was out for a while. When that came out, it was "I See You, Baby, Shaking That Ass." I don't know if you've ever heard that song or not, but
I haven't.
Literally Renault had that song in the commercial for that car. And we were over in the UK at my mother-in-law's house, and that commercial came on TV. And it's like 2007. Every time I see one, think about it, I just bust out laughing. I need to at least sit in that car so bad. Yeah, your collection is making me geek out car guy wise, and I'm not even there right now. It's just really cool. Really, really cool.
I talk to your point about stopping in gas stations and looking at cars, and I do that too all the time too. And I only speak English, so I'm when I'm in Europe, I'm of course in England I'm fine, but everywhere else I'm pretty handicapped. But I was in Czech Republic one time traveling and stopped in this gas station in the middle of nowhere, and this guy had this a Wartburg, which is an East German 2-stroke car, but it wasn't a regular Wartburg. You could see that he had hopped it up. He had the hood open because he was checking something, and I went over and looked at it, and he must have been like a master craftsman or something, because everything he did to the modifications to the engine and everything were perfect. I mean, thing looked spectacular. And of course, he didn't know a word of English, right? Because I'm saying, oh, it's a really nice car. I really love this thing. And, he's kind of looking at me like weirdo type of thing. But I thought, well, I'll give him my card, right? And I said, if you ever want to get rid of it, I don't know if he understood that, but I gave him my card. Of course, I never did hear from him. But, it was one of those same gas station type deals. So.
Come to find out, that gentleman actually was British, and he just didn't want to get rid of his car. That's why.
Okay. Yeah.
He was looking at you like, no, I don't speak a word. He actually probably was fluent. And he's like, no, go away. It's not for sale.
Yeah.
That's awesome. The passion that we have for all things mechanical is definitely universal. That's really cool.
And as Sean says, we're poking around the website a little bit in that, and you do something that I find extraordinarily nice, and I think more and more museums are doing it, in that you pretty much have your entire collection visible on the website with a little picture, brief description, and which is wonderful. Because it's also disappointing because I want to see that, and go and it's in the warehouse or not on display or something. But you also have in it the Lane Motor Museum book, or the book about the
museum, the
vehicles. Tell us a little bit about the book. And, it says it's a series. It's the first book in a series in a volume 1, and there's 50 cars, and you've said you have 500.
Right.
So is this going to be a 10-volume series and limited edition? So if I don't buy this one and I decide to buy book 6, I should have them. I'm going to spend a bunch of time on eBay.
We've always had people come to the museum, and they're always saying, do you have a book about the museum? Because, we like what you have. It's hard to find stuff about these unique cars. And so we talked about it for years about doing a book. And we finally, it took us this book just came out 3 weeks ago. This is our first one. It took us 4 years to do this one. Our goal is, we knew we couldn't do all the cars at once because that would just be too big a book. It would take too long. It'd be way too expensive and everything. So our goal is about every 5 years to do another 50 cars. We're not going to, with 500 cars, we're not going to cover every single car in the collection. With this book, we tried to pick the 50 most unique cars we have, and that's a very opinionated thing, right? So the next one we'll pick 50 more unique. The Gyro didn't get in this book because when we started the book, the Gyro was still in the restoration shop. It wasn't done yet. So it'll be, that's one car. People would say, how come that's not in the book? Well, that'll be in the next one. So, how many volumes are there going to be? If we probably did 300 of the collection, 200 to 300, that would probably cover, because we have a lot of 2CVs and a lot of 2CV variants. And, we're not going to cover every 2CV variant we have. Type of thing. We printed 3,500 copies of this book, which is a lot. The thing is, when the next one comes out, we'll still have some of the first, the first edition, but not first edition, but I guess we're not really calling it volume 1. We're saying it's the first of a series or something like that. And we could have it reprinted if it sells out, so it's not, again, it's an educational tool. And it's interesting when we did the book is we had Ken Gross, who likes the museum and agreed to do the writing. And when he started to get into it, he said, there's a lot of cars here I can't find anything about. It speaks to some of the uniqueness or weirdness of some of them. But so that's what's going on with the book.
I'm just curious because, like I said, I saw and I knew it had recently released. Again, it's one of those ideas that nice to go home with something. I visited the Harley Davidson Museum a few years ago, and I'm not a motorcycle guy, but I had to buy the book on the museum, and you never know what you missed.
Right.
It's got a couple extra stories in it, and your description says it tells a little bit, about the history of the Lane and the Lane family a little bit, and some of the stuff that hopefully we brought out a little bit on the podcast here, and I'm going through and I'm thinking of some of the stuff in the museum, and you have the occasional replica. I don't want to say a lot of replicas, but you've got replicas, and it's tough to get some of the the real cars. And are these things that I'm going to say they're somebody else's project that you've come across and they ran out of steam on, or are these things that I'm thinking the Dymaxion replica that you have. I was involved 20 years ago. I was working with a metal guy. He did a lot of the aluminum work on the Dymaxion house. It's on display at the Henry Ford.
Yeah.
He was with the restoration shop I was with. Did you commission this car, or was this somebody else's project that you stumbled across and you go, I'll get that and I'll finish it? Or, how do you choose the replicas? Are they things I guess my question is, are they things you're commissioning? Are they things you come across, or are they both?
Yeah, no, they're things we're doing. The Dymaxion was kind of I always liked the Dymaxion because of the story, and I'm always interested in unique aerodynamic cars and cars that kind of feature a lot of different attributes that they thought were better ideas that maybe weren't. That's propeller power cars are part of that. But the Dymaxion started out, it's interesting. A friend of mine named John Long, who lived in Toronto at the time, he lives in California now, but he was interested in doing a Dymaxion replica. And he did a bunch of research. He wrote a book. He kind of compounded all the research into a book, and got together one time and he said, I want to do a Dymaxion replica. And I think if we did 3, it'll be a lot cheaper, right? The first one is super expensive, and then 2 and 3, not that they're cheap, but obviously, it'll be a lot more cost effective. I'm like, it's a great idea. I'm all for it. He wanted me to try to find a third person, and I looked around and we couldn't find anybody else that was really interested. And then he dropped out. He said, I really want to do it, but now I've decided I don't want to do it. But I was still interested. And so what we did is we took all his research and did some additional research. We built the chassis in our shop, got a Ford flathead V8 and an old Ford frame and used all that. And then we shipped the running chassis to Ecora in the Czech Republic, who does mostly Tatra restorations, but they do a lot of other things, and they're great metal people. And so they built the body on the car. And that's and the reason we built a replica was, there's really only the one original that's in Reno, which, has not run in I don't know how long, decades. And now there's another replica that Lord Norman Foster built. He actually finished his before we finished ours because he had people in England do it. But, my thing is Reno's never going to get rid of theirs. And it's a really neat, interesting car. And if we build a replica, then people can see it and we can drive it around. And it that's the thing about a museum is it keeps the stories alive because you have this, I guess you can say maybe this is not an artifact, but, but it's, you can take it out and people can see it and they can get interested in it. If stuff that gets hidden away and never gets seen and never goes around, eventually it's going to disappear and the story's going to disappear. So that usually when we do a replica, it's because the original there's some cars, the original are there was maybe an original and it's long gone, or maybe there's only one and it's in a museum and it's never going to leave, right? The only way you're going to have one is to build a replica.
Totally in agreement. I've always, again, I'm jumping back to the Barber Museum, but a lot of museums like that, they have a lot of replicas because they're things that you need to tell a story. And you can't tell the story without that piece. And like you said, there's only one surviving Dymaxion. Heck, they only built 3 of them, so there's only been 4 ever really constructed. And you're never going to get it out of the National Automobile Collection. It's I assume Bill Harrah bought it, and it's never going to go anywhere. Obviously, they chose to keep it when they auctioned off all of Harrah's stuff, so it has its significance. And I guess I like the Aero cars and things like that. Also, I was involved at one point with a portion of a Stout Scarab that was being restored and has been featured in a lot of books and such. And just a lot of that 30s thinking, and basically they're building round minivans at the time, and it's just a good creative. I think there were a lot of ideas in the 30s, and the car was finding its path. And I say, just glad to see it. It was it's another one of those interesting things in the collection. We're going to wind up here, but I've got to ask you the one question that everybody asks you, but I'll ask it in a different way. What are your top 3 favorite vehicles? Because I know you can't, they're all like children. You can't choose your favorite, but let's say, God forbid, the place burned down and that. What 3 cars are you rushing in to save? And
that's a really tough one because I one of the things I tell people, and I think Dale Waxler kind of made this up. When you ask him what his favorite motorcycle is, he says it's the last one I rode. And I would say that same thing is I appreciate every car for what it represents, or maybe what it doesn't represent sometimes, right? But if I had to pick 3, of course, I'd pick my MGTF that I built as a kid, took my driver's training test in, still have. So it's not a special, the TF to me is not a special car, but to me, it's an emotional attachment, right? And that's what cars are, is people are emotionally attached. So I'd pick that one. I think I'd pick the old Fiat 500. I think that's just a great design. It's a great driving car. Super well executed. I like Lotus a lot, and I really like the Lotus. I like all Lotuses, right? But I really like the Lotus Elan. I think it was just a spectacular execution of a great handling, perfectly powered car. That's what I picked those 3 today. As I tell some people, come back and ask me in a couple of weeks. I might give you 3 different ones.
We'll call you back in a half hour and see where they're
Yeah.
Which generation of Elan? Because I knew you had the Elise and the Evora, and I'm trying to click through to try to catch up. I guess you've got...
It's a 73, so would be a Mark III or Mark IV. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's still kind of the original design. It's a 70.
It's a 70,
so
okay.
It is a Mark III. Yeah. So I wasn't sure if we were getting up to the M100 along.
No,
from,
no, 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 no.
Or and then of course you've got a race car there too. So go on with my question, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, so I might have a guess on what it is. You have all these categories of cars, the micro cars, the floating cars, the aero cars, the propeller powered cars. What's your favorite group? Is there a favorite group? Or something that you really, when you see it for sale, I got to add it to the
my favorite group would be the micro cars, because they did a lot of really interesting things. Now, a lot of them weren't successful, but I think, when the micro car people kind of got going after World War II, the micro car kind of evolved because of economic hardship. And so the only criteria was it had to be cheap to make and it had to be cheap to run. And there really were no other, back then, rules, right? So they had all these ideas about how to do this. Like some cars, you use a motorcycle engine and you wouldn't have reverse, so they were two-stroke engines, so they could put a different set of points in it to change the timing and start the engine up backwards, and that's how you got reverse. The Rovan D4 that has, we're on the phone, but if I could show it to you, you would understand. So the window, it's a piece of pane of glass, and it flips down into the door. It's one piece, and then to roll the window, it doesn't really roll up. You flip it up, and it's got a little flange, and then the window's up. I mean, it's just a beautifully simple solution to having a window. Right now, the only downside is you can't put it up and down when you're moving, because it flips up in where your body is when you're sitting in the car, right? So you'd have to stop to put it up or down. But the microcar people, they did a lot of that stuff. As times got better, a lot of it just didn't really matter. But they really put a lot of thought into that. The PLP50, they did a lot of crazy stuff. And some of it successful and some of it not. But so I would pick the microcars as kind of my favorite grouping.
Not that you need my justification, but I can see that, because it's something I don't think Americans understand is, really how small these micro cars were. I mean, there's always the famous scene with Jeremy Clarkson driving the Peel through the offices at the BBC. And I heard a rumor from a couple British friends that I have that they actually wanted to use a Sinclair C5, which I know you have in your collection also, and I absolutely like because it has Lotus ties. That they wanted to use it, but all the Sinclair people said, no, we're not going to let Clarkson drive a Sinclair. They'll destroy the reputation. But, it's, and the Sinclair C5 is the smallest car ever approved for legal road use in Great Britain. It's really not much more than a recumbent bicycle, because that's what it is. So it's been, kind of great just to touch base and talk with you and get a little bit more feeling of the museum. Time I visited, you were firing up Gyro Car.
Okay, yeah.
Took some time. Yeah, you took some time and chatted with me and my fiance as we were up there for some other things, and showed us around, showed us the restoration shops. And it's nice, you didn't know me from the, Jack, and I didn't say anything or push anything, and it was just, we got in conversation and knew you were very approachable, and that's always nice, that you'll take times with the patrons and answer some questions. And that I'm sure everybody wants to talk to you, and when they see you, because you have some distinct qualities about you that make you very easily identifiable. Thank you for taking the time then, and again, thank you for taking an hour out of your day today to chat with two guys in Alabama with, actually there's four of us that have this podcast, but two of us this morning. Forward to visiting, and maybe Sean will talk to you about coming up, and we'll shoot a feature on the car.
Yeah. I would love to do that. I would absolutely. Once we get past what we're going through right now and whatever the new normal is, I mean, when we get to that, if you're open to it, Jeff, I would. The more I look at the website, the more I'm like, how have I not been there? Like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your collection aligns with, the car geek inside of me in a big, big way, man. It's like John said, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. I appreciate it greatly.
My pleasure. And I want people to know that I am approachable. So, because if you see me and I'm wandering around, I'm probably looking at something, but I mean, feel glad to come up and say hi to me. I mean, I see some people that look like, okay, you know, he's better not say to hi to him. He's whatever. But you know, I love talking to people about cars. I mean, it's fantastic.
Well, there's like I said, there's just so much to talk to you about and so much on display at the museum. Everybody, you know, look up the Lane. You're on Instagram at the Lane Museum website, you know, lanemotormuseum.org. We'll have some links up on the No Driving Gloves Facebook, and we'll throw some pictures up on Instagram and that. I actually have pictures I own, so I can do that on Instagram without having to steal from anybody. And, you know, Jeff joined us via phone today, so the video feed on this podcast won't really have him. You'll just have Sean and I's beautiful mugs bouncing back and forth.
But you'll have cool micro cars behind John and an AutoZam behind me in the video feed. So.
Be sure to swing by, look up the Lane, order his book. We'll put a link to that up on the website and the Facebook page too. And swing by and see him. And again, thank you, Jeff, for taking a time out of your day for chatting with us.
My pleasure. Enjoy talking about cars and other things. So,
thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.